Did you get the little notification about that?
I did.
All right. All right. Welcome to another episode of Saturday Sauna Night. I am Steve, and we have a special guest today. Um, give a brief intro here. This is BG Bradley, and um, kind of a man of many talents. I originally knew him as he was one of my English teachers and American literature teacher in high school, and we kind of reconnected later, sort of through um, a music and poetry events we've been working on, and I began following his Facebook page where he published poems every day, um, a series of. I mean, you were doing one a day, right, for a while.
Right, right.
Um,
I still am. Yeah.
Still am, yeah. Northwards with Beej, and the outdoor writing and just the way you captured kind of the spirit of the UP, the essence of living up here in that writing that kind of intrigued me, and I kind of used that as a model for some of my own writing. So BG is an author, a poet, a playwright, and um, also avid duck hunter. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to chat about today, just because I don't know a whole lot about duck hunting. I've read some of your hunting stories a little bit, and I found them relatable, not in the sense that I was like, oh yeah, this is how my duck hunting experience was, but some of the other things I do outside, there were some universal threads there. Just a joy in being outdoors and in nature, and you know, pursuing animals, and that sort of sport. So I guess I wanted to start off with that. And so you're out at camp right now.
That's right.
And so how it's kind of been a roller coaster ride of weather in October. I imagine it's pretty warm out there today.
It is. Yes.
And we were just coming off of a little blast of early winter about a week and a half ago now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you said during that time you had some really great hunting.
Yeah. It's pretty predictable, really. The when you get to an early blast like that, you get swirling winds and winds shifting around towards the north. It's not so much the ducks locally; it's what those kind of fronts have to do with the migration pattern from Canada. So if a big push is coming out of the north, almost always the hunting is pretty good, and it was pretty good last week. It was a pretty darn solid week, and yeah, lots of work for my dogs and for me. If I shot better, I would have had even more ducks. But it was a fine week, a lot of fun, and I've been hunting since in the same locale since I was 14 years old. So, I mean, there's a lot of history. I'm 63 now, and I've never missed a year, and it's just there's just something about that. Just and it doesn't matter how many times you go out there. And now that I'm retired, I go out there all the time. Um, you see something new every day, and sometimes it has nothing to do with ducks. But you always see something new, so it's always worth it to go out there.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel the same way about a lot of the fishing I do. I've not been
Yeah.
doing it for nearly as long as you have, duck hunting, but even the short time that I've sort of been engaging more in the outdoors and getting into the wilderness, and initially I've seen jokes and stuff about fishermen. You start out initially and you want to just catch fish all the time, and then you go on a little longer and it's more about, okay, exploring water, new places, spending time with friends and family, and then there comes a point where
Right.
you're just happy to be out there, just experiencing and
Right.
immersed in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is very true, Steve. And of course, right now you're right in the middle of raising your kids. And what you'll find, well, if your kids get involved in it with you, that's wonderful, of course. But what you'll find is in the years when you're, when you're raising your kids, um, if you happen to get out by yourself, it tends to mean more to you all the time, because it's just something that you could do just at whim when you were younger becomes something that you barely have time for.
Yeah.
And now I'm back around to that point where I'm here basically by myself, and I have every day I can go out if I want to, and I just appreciate it so much. Um, in Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, he talks about two concepts about nature, and of course his is about the sea, so it's the Spanish for the sea. But the two visions of looking at the sea, and I would argue of looking at nature, are Elmar and Lumar, and it's just what you're talking about there. When you're young, your whole thing is, oh, how many fish can I, how many ducks can I get, how much success can I have, and it's kind of a competition that you're in, and you're pushing for numbers, and that's the Elmar, kind of the masculine way of looking at nature, and then as you get older, then it becomes just being there and being a part of it.
Yeah.
And how many birds you get, or how many fish you catch, becomes just kind of a secondary thing. It doesn't matter that much anymore. It's just being in that place, and especially a place that you've spent all of the years in. Just
Yeah.
being there again, and being part of it becomes the whole thing.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I admittedly have not done a great job reading. It's something I like to do, but it's something I've neglected a lot, especially since having kids. I'm lucky if I read a book or two a year. But one book that I did read within the last year was Alda Leopold's Sand County Almanac. And
Yeah.
he talks about almost the exact same thing you just mentioned from Hemingway. Um, especially his part in the book where he talks about um, the green fire that he saw die in the wolf's eyes. Um, but he was talking about being young and full of trigger itch, and you know just how that changed over the years. That's interesting. Um, so like I said, I'm kind of clueless when it comes to duck hunting or any type of bird hunting at all. My brother has gone out a little bit for grouse this year, and I was kind of talking with him more about that and sort of how you even get started with it. But so are you hunting out of a boat or a canoe or something like that when you go?
Well, I use a small John boat to
Okay.
get to my blind, which is about a mile and a half from here.
Okay.
And over the years, we for years and years and years, my older brother and I hunted together, and we always had an outboard motor and stuff. And what I found over the years was that in just trying to make that mile and a half from my camp to the spot where we hunt, we broke up and ruined so many motors with the sand and silt and everything else that gets into them, trying to get there, that now, it kind of is counterintuitive, but as I've gotten older, I like to paddle down there more, and it's good exercise, obviously, but it can be 45 minutes to an hour and a half just to get there. But the only thing that's going to break down is me, and I
Sure.
don't have to end up running to a shop or anything. And the other thing I found too is by going down there more quietly, I tend to have better hunting once I get to the blind early in the morning, because the birds aren't spooked and spinning around on the whole lake.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I do some grouse hunting, not probably near as much as your brother does. I do that just kind of as a sideline with my duck hunting, and haven't this year yet. But um, that's a good thing to contrast, because I mean, with grouse hunting, basically you can, you grab your shotgun and your blaze orange and your license, and if you have a dog, your dog. and you go out the door and you go into the woods and you hunt.
Yeah.
Well, with duck hunting, it's just and it's so much preparation. I mean, there are decoys to worry about, and then of course you're taking your shotgun out in just the most foul weather you can possibly imagine. So I mean, there's just you're constantly. I mean, I basically clean out my. I have a Browning over under 12, and I basically clean that out after every time I go out there. And invariably, when I do clean it out, sand comes out of it. I mean, you're going down into an area where, and anybody that duck hunts, unless they're maybe hunting on farmland or something, a lot of people do that. But if you're hunting in a swamp or in a bog or like a bog like where I hunt, it's just stuff is going to get on your gun. It's going to get in your equipment. It's just it's part of the deal. So you got to prepare that. And then, like I said, all the decoys, of course, they have to be taken out there. And then there's very specific ways you need to set up the decoys, and the decoys need to be of a certain species depending on what time of year it is, and then you switch the species out as the year goes on. And that's kind of an interesting thing this year. And I don't know if it has to do with climate change or what, but right now, even after that big kind of wintry blow that we had, we are still seeing fairly early season ducks. Like today, I took a black mallard hybrid, and I mean that's usually a bird that we don't see much after the 10th or so of October, and they're still around. So I mean, might just be this year that the migration is slowed. I don't really know, but that was unusual. I mean, I had already taken my mallard decoys back into camp because I didn't think I was going to need them anymore, and I had set out for my late season ducks, and we're just barely starting to see late season ducks like your buffleheads and bluebills and stuff like that now, and not in big numbers. And you know, we're seeing these mallards and stuff this late. It's very, very, very strange. And then the other aspect of it is calling, and there are people who are absolute masters of a duck call. I do okay, but I have seen guys that can just call ducks down from 1,000 feet and just make them spin right in and come right into the decoys, and that's a talent that I don't have. I seem to be able to attract them if they're fairly close, but I can't do that. And I hunted out here one time with a guy that was just a marvel. It was worth having sitting next to you just because you got so many more birds because he can just call them down. And it's a real talent. So
That
there's all of that. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think about sometimes, especially early on when I started getting into fishing more, and I'd go out with my brother-in-law. He was one of the people who really, I mean, he basically lives his life outdoors, but he kind of helped me get into fishing and learn about the gear and techniques and things. And it could be sitting next to him in the boat or in the ice shack or something, doing the exact same thing, and he just something about the finesse or whatever technique,
Right.
and he could outfish you, which
Yeah.
is just interesting.
Yeah. My father was like that too.
Yeah.
You'd sit right next to him and watch everything that he did, try to do exactly what he did, and no. And then what he would always do with me was he was a great guy, but he would kind of glance at me when he would see that I wasn't getting a fish, and little did I know that he already had a fish on, and he would go, I'm getting really bored here. Why don't you hold my pole for a second? And he would hand me his pole. Of course, there's already a fish on it. And then I thought I was this great fisherman. It was much, much later that I figured out what he was doing. Pretty cool.
So that's another thing that I didn't really understand a lot about until I started until I became a teacher and was teaching like some environmental science and different things with looking at the different wildlife we have around us. But yeah, you mentioned all the different species and kind of knowing what time of year they're going to be coming through. um it sounds like there's quite a bit of, I guess, science to that. I mean, that's the same thing with a lot of the migratory fish that come in from the Great Lakes, to spawn and
Yeah.
stuff. I never got really big into that type of fishing, but people will be out there with their stream thermometers measuring the water temperature, waiting for the salmon or whatever to come up and start spawning.
Right. Yeah.
So it sounds like kind of a similar thing. Is it pretty much
Well, I think it is.
temperature dependent, or?
Yeah, well, it's weather dependent too. And like I said, I mean, normally by this date we are seeing late season ducks, and we would even by now be beginning to see golden eyes, which are ducks that don't usually come until November and well into November. But we would be starting normally to see them, and we're not seeing them, and the buffleheads that normally come beginning about 2 weeks ago are just starting to come now. Bluebills we've had for about a week, but again, these mallards are hanging around. So it is normally, normally you could just about mark the date when the different ducks are going to show up. But this year, and last year was similar too. They seem to be coming late, and I don't know enough about the science to say that it's climate change, but that wouldn't surprise me all that much. But where I'm hunting is kind of in the watershed between two Great Lakes. So if there is bad weather out on the Great Lakes, then typically ducks will come in off the Great Lakes and then try to kind of seek shelter in the smaller water where I'm hunting. So that's a predictor too. And those are all things you got to kind of keep track of,
Yeah.
But the main thing is watching those fronts. I mean, if there's a front coming through at, for instance, Thunder Bay, then you have a pretty good idea that probably the hunting's going to be pretty good, because they're going to get pushed right across the Great Lakes and then be seeking some kind of shelter inland.
Yeah. Well. Well,
and then the other thing too, you were talking about the species.
Yeah.
Is with duck hunting, you really have to get really pretty good at being able to identify the birds you're looking at in the air.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. And, if you're dependent upon, like colors and things like that, you have to literally, and this only happens with lots of time, lots of watching them. You have to start to learn the physical characteristics of their motions, the way they move in the air, the way that they move in the water. You have to kind of get so oh, that has to be this because I've seen this behavior in this kind of a duck, before, and the shape and the size. You have to learn it, and you have to be able to do it in a split second sometimes, because the regulations a lot of times, there are certain ducks, and rightly so, that are, you can only take a certain number of them, and so you have to be very, very careful about like right now, bluebills, for instance. You can take 2 bluebills, and then come November 7th, you can only take 1. So if you have a flock of bluebills come through and you've already taken some bluebills, well, you're out of luck. I mean, you got to just let them sit in your decoys, basically, which is kind of a frustrating thing, but that's just the way it is. And it's so much better now, though, Steve, than it was years ago, when the numbers were not anywhere near as good, and that's the good news, as they are now across species. Like back in the 1980s, the season was limited to 4 weeks, and you could take 3 birds a day. And now it's more like 8 or 9 weeks, and you can take, generally speaking, with most species, you can take 6 birds a day.
Okay.
So it's a very, very different situation than it used to be. And we're seeing, and I think anybody that duck hunts will tell you this, that's been ducking in it for a long time. We just see so many more ducks than we were seeing back in the 1980s, and that's all due to just conservation efforts. And the one organization that I would really say is more responsible for it than anybody else is Ducks Unlimited. They've just done wonderful things for it. And this isn't a commercial for Ducks Unlimited. I'm just stating a fact.
Yeah.
I mean, that organization has done so much for the preservation of the flocks coming through and the great migration coming through. It's amazing.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question, is why do you think it is better now? And I was kind of wondering about the conservation piece. So I'm a Trout Unlimited member, and I'm not super active, but I join each year and I kind of follow the literature and their newsletters, and they they haven't converted me to full on fly fishing yet, but yeah, a lot of the same stuff. I see, even in the UP, working with different just different streams and rivers, and monitoring and restoration projects. This is totally not related to anything we're talking about, but a fascinating thing I just learned this year, which it's no secret to people who work with streams and especially cold water fish like trout. Apparently, the more downed wood that's in a stream um, creates better water quality and better habitat. Which, I mean, I guess it makes sense when you think about small fish needing, shelter. And but even stuff like it kind of agitates the water, so it like increases the oxygen levels. I never knew it's nice learning about that sort of stuff, because it just gives you a better knowing that conservation piece, and the what work goes into making sure we have fishable waters, or a population of ducks that is able to be hunted, or even deer,
right.
which is coming up here. So
yeah, and I think that's, well, John Muir talked about this back in the early 20th century, late 19th century. I mean, just the interconnectedness of all these different species, and the land and the water and everything else, and conservation at every level is just crucial. It's just absolutely crucial. And we're it's a really good use of technology and stuff that's going on. And like, for instance, this morning, I mean, this is such a when I was a boy, this would certainly not have been possible. This morning I took a hybrid black duck mallard drake, and it was banded. So, and there's a phone number right on there on the band to call, and then also a website. And I went onto the website and basically registered this bird that I had gotten, and within seconds, it came back and told me that the bird was 8 years old, that it had been hatched in a place in Pennsylvania. Or, I'm sorry, not hatched, banded in a place in Pennsylvania, was hatched in 2014. It's just amazing. I mean, I know all about this bird now, and this is what's happening. These efforts are being made to keep track of all of this stuff, and so that we can maintain the flights and well, just if you much more amazing than hunting the birds is just having the opportunity to sit in a blind and see. And the big flocks rarely, and this is almost true anywhere unless you're hunting out on Lake Superior, the big flocks, the 90, 100, 200 flocks of birds, which you only see a few times in a year, they never actually come into your blind. You don't get that kind of numbers coming into your blind typically, unless you're on the Great Lakes. But just to see them fly over and to see them all take off at one time is just, there are no words for it. It's just one of the most mind-boggling things you could possibly imagine. It's just overwhelming, really. And it's something that's my father was got me started duck hunting, and my brother and me started duck hunting, and it's just a real gift. We just we go from generation to generation, and continue to pass that along. And my nephews now are big into it, and it's just it's good to see, and that's the thing. I mean, of course, any kind of hunting, any kind of fishing, it isn't really about the fish. It isn't really about the birds. It isn't about the deer or whatever it is. It's just about being there with being out in nature, and then being with family, and or being solitary, and just communing with the whole thing. It just to me is the real focal point of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spend a lot of my summer months on a lot of the small um, ponds and lakes that are managed for brook trout, and a lot of these places, there's usually a two track that leads up in a kind of a primitive boat launch, but there's some you have to kind of you kind of have to drag your um, canoe or kayak or whatever through the woods. But you know um,
Sure.
I see a lot of loons out there, and watching them and how they interact. And this is kind of a funny thing, but most ducks can take off and fly vertically, right?
Right.
Because
Yes.
loons, apparently, I learned this too this summer. Loons like need an entire lake as like a runway to
Right.
go up into
Yeah. We
the air.
have. Yeah. When in the on the lake where I am, we've had nesting pairs since I was a little boy, and yeah, that is the truth. They need this whole long space to
Yeah.
take off. They are a strange creature, and actually, if I was talking with a biologist from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and this was back in the '80s, and he told me that scientists actually think that loons aren't actually birds per se, that they actually they're on obviously in the same tree, but they
Mhm.
but they actually branched off from that tree millions of years ago, and are not really birds. They're actually some a species all of their own, and some of the strange things that they do, it's quite believable. I mean, they literally cannot really walk on land very well
Yeah.
at all. So they don't really go on land except to nest, and normally their nests are right next to the water, so they can just kind of slide in and slide out. Um, and yeah, we've been keeping track of the loons on this lake for a long time, and I've seen some odd things with them. One of the things that they do is uh, when the loons are young, they stay down. The males, at least, stay down in the Gulf of Mexico for 2 or 3 years, and then when they get to that age, then they come north. Usually with a whole bunch of. It's almost like they're coming on a hunting party, and it's with a bunch of other males, and they will go north, and then they will try to seek out territory for themselves. And then when that happens, then you will see these territorial battles between the older male loon that's on the lake and one of these young loons, and it's amazing. They chase each other all over the lake. It's just
Yeah.
crazy.
I actually
Um,
I'm
yeah,
pretty sure I witnessed a little bit of that last summer on one of the lakes I fish pretty often.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty it
Yeah,
was
and the
interesting.
cries, and strange things, and then the chasing along the water. It's the most amazing thing. I
Yeah.
saw one time there that was going on, and I was paddling. This was in summertime. I was paddling along a shore, and the one loon that had been being chased was up near shore, and I could see that he was kind of, you know, he was weary. He was kind of slumped over a little bit, and all of a sudden he just jumped about 10 feet straight up in the air. And I couldn't figure out what had happened. And then I looked, and there was another loon that had come up from underneath him, the one that was chasing him. Had come up from underneath him, and he just popped up. It was like a cartoon. It was the
Wow.
funniest thing. Yeah.
Last
Oh,
summer I was fishing and I had a couple fish on my stringer, in the water. I was still fishing for a little bit, and I had one come underneath and try to grab one off of the stringer. It was a
well,
nice
sure.
sized brook trout, and it it was just kind of funny because they're big birds. It's
Oh yeah,
neat seeing them up close like that. I don't want to
yeah.
cut this too short, but apparently I only have 6 minutes left here to record
Okay.
unless I upgrade to Zoom Pro. So I kind of wanted to shift for the last few minutes, and
Yeah.
talk a little bit about your writing. So and I can kind of plug this a little bit for you. I have a few of your
Okay.
books here. These are the
Yeah.
ones these are the ones that I have so far from the Hunter Lake um
Right.
series. And so I know there's a couple more that have come out since then, right? So you have Old Hunter, which is like an anthology. It's kind of
Yeah. Well, it's well before that comes the Tales from
oh,
the Sugar
the Sugar
Shack, which
Shack,
is
yes.
the Sugar Shack, which is an anthology. It's kind of based. It's based on Chaucer's A Canterbury Tales,
Okay.
basically, but set in the UP at a sugar shack. And basically, the same idea happens in it that happens in Canterbury Tales. People come in and they tell a story,
Yeah.
and so the whole book is made up of those stories and little poetic introductions to each of the stories.
Eh,
And then Old Hunter is actually four different novellas
okay.
um, that are about some of the characters in Hunter and well, as they always say in the books, from in town, around the lake, and down the river, which is the places around this fictional town that I've created, Hunter. And of course, all the characters are in some way, shape, or form based on somebody I know in some way, shape, or form. But then once you and you're a writer, once you get working on a given character, then suddenly they become not the basis anymore, but their own being, their own creation,
Yeah.
and then that's where the fiction really starts to take off. But it's mostly about contemporary life in the Upper Peninsula, and uh, just based on so many things that I've lived through or lived with or imagined that could happen here, in this unique place that we both love so much. Yeah.
Well, and I know you've mentioned this before at some of the readings you've done, but so Hunter's a fictional town set in the Upper Peninsula, but you've mentioned it's a combination of, probably 10 or 15 or more different cities and towns that you know.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and then probably some details that I just invented too,
Yeah.
so it's yeah, it ends up being just complete fiction, but that's a writer has to write about something, and it almost always has some basis in even people that write science fiction, fantasy, things like that, it almost always has some basis in reality or in their lives or in some idea that they've had. So sure. Yeah. Um,
Well, and so especially, in this first one, Winter Heart, one of the things I noticed reading it was, so it's a novel, and it tells the story of this guy who's sort of solitary, and um but it's interspersed with bouts of poetry, and because the character is a poet and a writer, like
right,
yourself.
right.
And
Yeah.
so I just that was a really interesting mix, I thought, because it just it just adds an extra layer of complexity, um you know kind of reading that creative work through, created by a fictional character, and kind of how he sees things, and that was neat. Well, and then Summer Rounds, of
Oh,
course, is follows another character, but it's narrated by him.
mhm.
And
Yeah, yeah, um, and I've probably talked to you about this before, but I mean, the first book of Winter Heart started when I was just about to retire, and the first little bit of it came into my head, and I just started writing,
yeah.
and all of a sudden there it was, and then I was about three-quarters of the way through that, and this minor character in the first book, Dale Sylvanus, um, basically started talking in my head. I know that sounds strange, but it was like, he was telling me basically there's another side to this town. And Dale's book, Summer Rounds, is more about the kind of blue collar side of things, in this little community. And then from there, it just takes off in about 100 different ways, uh, from characters both major and minor from the first book. And right now, my publisher and I are working on the cover and the final edits on the last book, which will be the last book in the series, which is called Seasons of Hunter, and that's going to be out, I'm hoping, within the next month.
Okay.
So that will put the final touches on it. So in all, there will be 6 books in the series.
All right. I'm gonna have to cut us off here pretty quick, but I'm glad you were able to share about what you're working on currently, because I was gonna ask. But I'm gonna quickly wrap up.